Today I'm out here in the rain taking a look at the all-new 2018 Honda Clarity. There is a video of the Clarity hydrogen fuel cell on my channel, but today we're taking a look at the Clarity that is going to sell in volume. This is the plug-in hybrid. For 2018, Honda decided to bring us three different versions of the Clarity. We have the hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, we have a short-range EV that gives us 89 miles of electric range, and then we have this plug-in hybrid. The Clarity plug-in gives you range and fuel economy similar to the Chevy Volt, but in a much larger wrapper. The plug-in hybrid model is available in two different trims, both of which get full LED headlamps. We also have these very distinctive LED light pipes that run down the sides of the vehicle. Just above the multi-module LED headlamp, we have an LED turn signal strip right there, and the chrome strip that runs across the front of the vehicle actually comes into the headlamp module itself. Now right here in the middle of that chrome bar, we have a large Honda logo, and that's because radar adaptive cruise control and all of Honda's latest active safety systems are standard on all models. That includes Honda's lane keeping system as well as their forward collision braking system. Although the Accord and the Clarity look quite similar, this is not simply an Accord with next generation powertrains under the hood. But neither is the Clarity a completely different vehicle. This is obviously still related to Honda's larger front-wheel drive platform vehicles. One of the big changes between this and other mainstream Honda vehicles is the aluminum-intensive construction of the Clarity. We have an aluminum hood, aluminum trunk, aluminum doors, and aluminum fenders, all to help reduce the curb weight. But that said, of course, obviously with an engine under the hood and a big battery pack under the vehicle, this still weighs about 4,000 pounds, about as much as a full-size luxury sedan. When designing this car, Honda took a very different approach than Toyota or GM did with their hybrid and plug-in hybrid vehicles. That's because this is actually a mid-size sedan. At 192.7 inches long, this is almost exactly the same size as the current generation Camry and Accord. That's considerably larger than a Prius or a Chevy Volt. It's really noticeable back here in the rear seats. Honda likely decided to make the Clarity this large because it's a little bit easier to fit their hydrogen fuel cell system under the vehicle, and the plug-in hybrid and the electric vehicle benefit from the extra size. One of the key differences between this and the current generation Accord, however, is the wheelbase, and that's the distance between the front wheels and the rear wheels. This is about 3 inches shorter in terms of wheelbase than the Accord, and that results in about 4 inches less combined legroom on the inside, although headroom is quite similar. You'll also notice that the overall profile of the vehicle is very similar to the current generation Accord, although it looks like it's been inflated a little bit taller. And that's not just optical illusion happening. This is actually a little bit taller than the Accord. It also is a little bit taller right back here at the trunk. This has a profile that reminds me a little bit of the last generation Accord Cross Tour. The exaggerated shapes we see up front aren't entirely styling. These are actually functional as well to help reduce drag in this vehicle. We actually have a functional vent right down here at the bottom of the bumper and then an outlet right here in the front wheel well that helps reduce pressure up front, direct some of the air towards the side of the vehicle more efficiently. That's also why we find these functional vents integrated into the front doors. Air enters here and then exits right down here. We also have partial wheel skirts over the rear wheels. This was something that was tried in the 1980s in a wide variety of vehicles, but this execution is definitely more elegant and more functional since you don't have a panel to remove. Now, it's obviously not as efficient as covering the entire wheel, but does help the looks of the vehicle. At the back of the Clarity, the overall profile and the integrated spoiler also help improve aerodynamics. But unlike a Prius, this is actually a sedan. This is a trunk, not a liftback. Out back, we have taillight modules that are reminiscent of what we see in the Civic and the Accord with this strong C shape going on there. And these are full LED taillight modules. So the turn signal you're seeing on that other side is also an LED, as are the backup lamps. So these are not combination lamps like we see in some of the competition, where they're a mix of incandescent and LED elements. To help improve airflow, they keep the bottom of the bumper very flat and clean so we don't have any visible exhaust tips, and these vent-looking things on either side of the bottom bumper are not actually functional. With all of the other functioning vents going on the Clarity, I actually wish that Honda had skipped these fake vents on either side of the bumper. The Clarity's hybrid system is good for 212 combined horsepower, which is basically the same as the Accord hybrid. However, Honda didn't just take the Accord hybrid's drivetrain, jam it under this hood, and then connect it to a bigger battery pack. Instead, they decided to redesign this hybrid system a little bit in order to make it more appropriate for a plug-in hybrid vehicle. So instead of using a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine, they give us a 1.5-liter 4-cylinder engine that produces a little less power, 103 horsepower and 99 pound-feet of torque. The gasoline engine is mated to a starter motor generator unit that's good for about 100 horsepower, although Honda has not released official specifications for that particular motor unit yet. On the other side of the engine bay, we find a 181 horsepower AC electric motor that's good for 232 pound-feet of torque, and that motor is directly connected to the front wheels. The overall design of this hybrid system is quite interesting because it's very unlike what we see from Chrysler, from Ford, or from Toyota. We have the engine over here, that generator unit, those two are connected together, and then we have that motor unit on the other side driving the front wheels. So this is a serial hybrid system below about 45 miles an hour or so. That means that from 0 to about 45 miles an hour, you get 181 horsepower. It's entirely given to us by that electric motor on the other side. After that speed, a clutch pack engages, and then the engine can help drive the wheels through a fixed ratio. Under full acceleration, if that mode is engaged, you're getting 181 horsepower from the electric motor and the balance of that power from the gasoline engine. If that sounds similar to the Outlander hybrid, then you're right. However, this vehicle can produce 212 horsepower at much lower speeds than the Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in can. That's because of the overall design of this particular system. We have that powerful 181 horsepower electric motor on the other side, so the engine doesn't really need to produce that much power in order to bring you up to the 212 horsepower total. Obviously, we're pulling power from the battery pack and, of course, from the engine to give you that total. Fuel economy comes in at 42 miles per gallon combined when operating as a hybrid vehicle and 110 mpge when operating as an electric vehicle. 42 may not sound that extraordinary, but keep in mind this is a 4,000-pound mid-size sedan. So this is considerably larger than a Chevy Volt, even though the fuel economy numbers in hybrid mode are actually about the same. And we get more power out of this hybrid system, 212, versus the about 150 that we find in the Chevy. Powering the plug-in hybrid system is a lithium-ion battery pack that's positioned under the seats of the vehicle and a little bit in the trunk as well. Capacity is 17 kilowatt hours, which is good for about 47 miles of electric range. This is one of the larger plug-in hybrid battery packs we find in America. The average plug-in battery pack seems to be about 9 to 10 kilowatt hours. This is significantly larger. Charging happens via this charging port right here on the front of the vehicle. It's an AC charging port only, but it does connect to a 6.6 kilowatt charger, which can charge this from 0 to full in about 2.5 hours. Although I found these front seats fairly comfortable, our overall seat comfort score has to be below top-end models of the Camry, the Accord, the Sonata, and the Optima. That's because we have no adjustable lumbar support at all, even in this top-end Clarity model. Honda has priced the Clarity very, very aggressively for 2018, and in order to do that, they have had to leave out a few features that we do find in those top-end mid-size sedans. Like we don't have a sunroof right here, no panoramic roof, no adjustable lumbar support, and of course the base model of the Clarity has a manual seat. However, we still have a 2-position seat memory over there, and we have a tilt telescopic steering column with a moderate range of motion. It's also worth noting that the front passenger seat does not have the same range of motion as the driver's seat. So while this does tilt on the front of the seat bottom cushion and the back of the seat bottom cushion, the passenger seat does not. Hopping into the back seat, you'll instantly notice a huge difference between this and the Prius or the Chevy Volt. These rear seats are considerably more comfortable, they're softly padded, and the rear bench is much wider than we find in the Prius or the Volt. That means that adults are going to be much more comfortable back here. I still have a generous amount of legroom, even though again we have a little bit less combined legroom than we find in the Accord. I have about 5 inches left sitting right here behind myself. On the downside, headroom is a little bit limited. If I sit upright in this back seat, my head is touching the ceiling. That's something that we also see in the current generation Accord. That means that there are mid-size sedans in America that will give you a bit more headroom if what you're looking for, and that's why I give these rear seats a split score. So if you compare this to the average mid-size sedan in America, I'm going to give this 7 out of 10 points. But if you compare this to other plug-in hybrid EVs out there, which is a pretty wide bucket of cars, then I'm going to give this 9 out of 10 points. You will find a little bit more headroom in the back of some of the plug-in crossovers, but this is definitely more generous than what we find in the Prius Prime or the Volt. It's very noticeable if I move over to the middle seat, because you could put 3 adults back here if you needed to, and although again my head is touching the ceiling, it's not as cramped as we see in that Chevy Volt. And of course we don't have that enormous battery pack running through the middle of the vehicle, so we have a hump down here that is very similarly sized to the average mid-size sedan in America. Rear passengers get a fold-down armrest with cup holders. The rear seats fold in a 60-40 fashion. We'll take a look at that in a bit. But first, let's go to the rear doors, because this is another area where there's a big difference between this and the Chevy and the Toyota. We have trim and parts quality that is identical to the front doors. So we have these suede inserts on this rear panel, a soft touch armrest, the same metallic effect trim, and imitation open pore wood, and of course, more soft touch materials than we definitely find in the back of a Volt or a Prius. Behind this trunk lid, we find 15.5 cubic feet of storage space. That's on the large side for the mid-size sedan category in America, but it is below the all-new Accord at 16.7 cubic feet. But the big difference between this trunk and the Accords is the shape. If I lift this bag out of the cargo area, you might be able to see what I'm talking about. We have this lower section of the trunk, which is about the same size as that 22-inch roller bag, and then it bumps up a little bit because we do have a portion of that hybrid battery pack right there. Because of this step up in the trunk is not quite as practical as a trunk that was the same size, but more square. Under the lower tier of the storage area, we don't find a spare tire, but we do have a little storage cubby right there where you can put things like your emergency charging cable or other small items. Although not quite as large as some of the non-hybrid vehicles in America, Honda was still able to give us a large trunk pass-through behind the 60 and the 40% folding rear seats. You might have trouble putting larger items through here, but skis, snowboards, and probably even surfboards would definitely fit. Above the rear seat backs, we see one of the more unusual features of the Clarity. This is actually a small glass window that allows you to see from the cabin back there into the trunk. The reason that Honda gives us this little window is because on the back of the trunk, we have another glass section. And that means that when you're viewing through the rear view mirror, you're seeing out the back of this upper glass right here and through this glass section right here that's part of the trunk lid. If you think that rear window arrangement sounds a little bit funny, this is a view through the rear view mirror. As you can see, that rear view is split between that lower window and the more sloped window above the trunk lid. It actually works a little bit better than you might think. The alignment is critical and it's just about perfect. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are in the top-end trim of the Clarity, so things are a little bit different in the base model. No model has a sunroof at this time, so you won't see one right there above our heads, but we do have height-adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and the front passenger, and two-way adjustable headrests. The model that we're driving has the leather upholstery, and this interior is made of mostly environmentally friendly materials according to Honda. Their target with this vehicle is not just to improve fuel efficiency, but also to improve the environmental friendliness of some of their mainstream vehicles. The interior design in the Clarity is sleek and modern and identical to the hydrogen Clarity that we recently saw. So we get more of that imitation open pore wood trim right here on this upper section. I'll zoom in so you can see that a little bit better right there. This is actually a very good impersonation of wood trim. Honda's always done a good job at some of their more eccentric materials in the cabins, and this is definitely one of them. Below that, we have this stitched suede section again. One of the interesting things about this, of course, that it does actually have a nap to it. So you can see right there, if I run my finger across it, you can actually see a little bit of a grain difference right there. Now this is very attractive. It also is very luxurious, but it may be a little bit more difficult to clean, especially if you have kids with dirty hands in the car. Below that, we have a large bin-style glove compartment. I was easily able to fit a tablet computer inside. In the middle of the dashboard, we see two large air vents and then a standard color 8-inch touchscreen infotainment system. This infotainment system is not running the same software that we see in the 2018 Honda Accord. This is actually a little bit more similar to what we see in the Civic and some of Honda's slightly older products. This still supports Apple CarPlay and Android Auto like we saw there, and of course, built-in factory navigation if you choose that option. No hybrid or plug-in hybrid vehicle would be complete without an energy graph telling you where the energy is going. So we see our EV range on this side and our hybrid vehicle range over here. If you want to know more about that infotainment software, there is a separate view on our channel where we go into that in greater detail. Below the screen, we have the controls for our dual-zone automatic climate control system and the heated seat buttons on either side. Below the climate control, we have basically the same button-style shifter that we see in the Accord and several Acura models. Above that, we have the Econ button, a Sport Mode button, and a Hybrid Vehicle Operation button. Right now, we're in EV mode, so if we press this HV button, it will try and save the battery charge for later. And then if I were to press and hold this button down, it would enter a charge mode. Because of the power output of the engine, if you're going up and over a large mountain pass, there's going to be a point where you just have about 100 horsepower left, so you might want to charge that battery in advance. Behind that, we have an electric parking brake, the auto brake hold button, and then two very large and very deep cup holders, as you can see here. I have a Yeti container right there, and that is quite deep, so it can very easily accommodate those large takeout drinks in America. Under the shifter, we find a large storage compartment. This is where we find the 12-volt power outlets, two USB inputs, and of course, room to store your smartphones and other accessories. Between the front seats, we find a padded armrest that opens to reveal a moderately sized storage compartment. I am a little bit sad that there's no USB input in there, because personally I prefer to keep my smartphone out of sight. The instrument cluster is a partial LCD unit. It's a little bit difficult to tell, but basically this square right here where the P is and this little Eco logo down to the bottom and then across in sort of an arc, This is the LCD that gives us our power gauge, charge gauge, our digital speedometer, and of course the multifunction trip computer right there in the middle. The rest of the elements are more LED driven elements. So the fuel gauge over here on the right and the battery gauge over here on the left, those are LED elements. Zooming in on that LCD, you'll see that we have a combined 250 miles of range, 28 miles of EV range because the battery's not fully charged, 222 miles of hybrid vehicle range. You can also see things like turn-by-turn navigation directions, your maintenance reminders, audio system information, Bluetooth phone interface, vehicle messages, vehicle settings. You can switch to kilometers an hour if you drive across the border. You can see the status of your active safety systems. You can also see the status of the hybrid system. So if I put it in gear and creep here, you'll see the power flowing out of the battery to the front wheels, or of course from the engine to the front wheels, or from the engine to the battery. The power gauge itself changes a little bit based on the mode that we're in. Right now we're in EV mode, so the maximum EV power we can deliver is illustrated right over here by this little end of the blue line. You can see those little hashes right there at the end of my finger. And that moves down the scale if I move to the hybrid vehicle mode operation. So if your battery is depleted, this is about where the EV mode will end, just like in a regular Prius or a regular Accord hybrid. But if we tell the vehicle that we want to use all of the battery, then the power gauge moves all the way up to the right. I'll talk a little bit more about regenerative braking later, but it is adjustable, and the display that tells you where your regen braking is set is right there to the right of that D for drive icon. The steering wheel is a 3-spoke design with small sport grips up top, an insert of that same imitation wood trim. On the right side, we have the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control. This also controls the lane keeping assistance system with that button right there. And then on the right side, we have the controls for the infotainment system. At the bottom, we have phone buttons along with a back button. We have a voice command button, an I button that changes the screens on that multifunction display. If I zoom in a little bit, you can see what's going on right there. You can also use this to toggle back and forth between those screens and click enter to choose that particular option. Once you've chosen the option, these buttons become track forward and backward for the infotainment system. To the right of that, we have the volume control, but this is not a touch slide volume control like we saw in some Civic models. I really didn't like that particular control. I do find this a lot more intuitive because you can accidentally hit that touch slider with your thumb while you're driving. On the back of the steering wheel, we find paddles, plus over here on the right, and minus over here on the left. These are how you control that regenerative braking that I showed you in the display earlier. But in kind of an odd twist, the vehicle does not remember your regenerative braking setting unless you're in the sport mode. This is a little bit different than other EVs and hybrids out there, because if you command max regen braking by clicking this paddle 4 times, then come to a complete stop, then start over again, and then try to stop again, you'll actually be going back to minimum regen braking, and then you'll have to click this paddle again. However, if we put the vehicle into sport mode, then we get a different icon on that display, and the regen braking will stick around through different braking cycles. Comparisons for the Clarity can be a little bit tricky because at the moment in the United States there really aren't very many plug-in hybrid mid-size sedans. We do have entries like the Optima plug-in hybrid and the Fusion plug-in hybrid at this time, but the majority of mid-size sedans with alternate motivation are regular hybrids, not plug-in hybrids. With that in mind, let's start diving into the numbers. We ran from 0 to 60 in this model in 7.5 seconds when it was in its hybrid mode. That's a little bit slower than the Accord hybrid we last tested, which is quite logical because the Clarity plug-in weighs about 4,000 pounds. Honda has programmed the software in the Clarity to make it easier to stay in electric mode. So if I take it out of the hybrid mode here and we're in electric mode, as we go up this hill, eventually it will, there we go, now it's moved back to the EV mode, I can actually put my foot almost all the way to the floor to one detent. But there is sort of a step down detent in the accelerator pedal, so I can floor it all the way, then I can get the hybrid system engaged. But that means it actually is easier in this vehicle to drive as an electric only car than many of the other plug-in hybrids in America. And if you were to do that, then 0 to 60 will take 9.5 seconds. That's quite logical, of course, because we're getting a little bit less power out of the system. In our braking tests, this model stopped from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in 118 feet. That's a pretty respectable stopping distance for a 4,000-pound mid-size sedan. Even though we have 235 with tires in the Clarity, these are low rolling resistance efficiency tires. So if you did want your Clarity to handle better or stop shorter, you could always swap these out for more of a mainstream all-season tire or perhaps a performance tire. Now obviously, if you did that, you would be trading handling and stopping ability for fuel economy, because it is going to drop your fuel economy score. In terms of overall handling, the Clarity does very well for itself, even though this is about a 4,000-pound car. Because of the location of the battery packs in the Clarity, the center of gravity is nice and low. It also has a slightly better weight distribution than some of the V6 sedans that we find in the mid-size segment. And of course, these tires are considerably wider than what we see on the Prius or the Chevy Volt. So this will definitely outhandle the Volt, and I would say it actually is fairly close to the mid-size sedan hybrid competition. The Clarity also does very well when it comes to our ride score. This suspension does an excellent job at soaking up large bumps and small bumps alike. In our cabin noise test, this model scored 69.5 decibels, which makes this one of the quietest hybrids that we've tested. This is definitely quieter in the cabin than the Volt or the Prius Prime. When compared against mid-size sedans, this is among the quietest in the group, but you will find other mid-size sedans with similar quiet interior scores. During our week of mixed driving, fuel economy has been pretty good in the Clarity. As a hybrid, we've been getting about 42 to 43 miles per gallon depending on how we've been driving it. Now keep in mind that if you routinely drive on highways at higher speeds, you are going to get well below that EPA fuel economy score. The reason for that is the fixed ratio that we see between the engine and the front wheels. So if you're driving 65 or perhaps even 70 miles an hour, you'll be in that 40 to 42 range. However, if you kick it on up to 75 or 80 miles an hour, you will notice the fuel economy really start to drop. When it comes to EV mode economy, this vehicle appears to be doing very well, but it doesn't give us an EV mode score that is separate from the miles per gallon score that we see on the displays. So for instance, the mile per gallon displays in this car are showing between 54 and about 199 mpg combined, that is gasoline plus electricity, of course. In terms of our overall range test, we had no problem getting 45 to 47 miles out of this battery depending on the terrain and of course the speed that you're driving. It's also worth noting that it's been a little bit cold out here in California while we've been driving this vehicle. It's been in the 40s, and that means that the car has been using the battery to heat the cabin, and that of course is going to suck up some power. You'll find a similar effect in a number of plug-in vehicles out there in terms of EV battery life. However, some plug-ins like the Kia Niro plug-in will actually turn on the gasoline engine in order to help heat the cabin in similar weather situations as this. So if you're looking for a car that will never turn on its gasoline engine as long as there's battery charge, then this or the Chevy Volt would be a good option. Honda has priced the Clarity surprisingly aggressively for 2018. It starts at $33,400, and if you went and get the Touring model, it's basically $3,200 more. Both models qualify for the maximum $7,500 federal tax credit, and of course various state and local incentives depending on the area of the country you live in. My usual disclaimer here applies, of course. If you depend on those credits to afford the vehicle, make sure you talk with a tax professional first to make sure they apply to your particular case. As we see in most Honda vehicles for 2018, Honda sensing is standard on the Clarity, so we get the radar adaptive cruise control with the autonomous braking, lane keeping assistance, etc. All of those are standard on all models. When it comes to hybrids with a plug, there are two ways to look at these vehicles. You can look at them as an EV with a backup plan, something like a BMW i3. That's targeted at someone that wants to drive an EV but is a little bit scared that they may not have the range all the time, so they want a backup plan without resorting to a DC fast charger or a slower charging station. On the other side of things, we have the hybrid with a bigger battery pack. This allows you to add power to that battery pack from your home plug or your plug at work, and then offset some of your fuel consumption from gasoline to electricity. The extreme on this end would probably be something like the Mini Countryman hybrid, which has a fairly small battery pack and really will revert to hybrid mode for a lot of different driving situations. The rest of the plug-in hybrids in America fall somewhere on this spectrum. Closer to something like the BMW i3 with the range extender, we have the Chevy Volt and of course the Honda Clarity, because these are more able to drive in EV mode over a wider range of situations. They also have bigger battery packs. And then closer to that Mini Countryman, we have something like the Kia Niro, which can't heat the cabin without using the gasoline engine, or the Toyota Prius Prime, which doesn't have a lot of power when it's driving in EV mode only and really will resort to the gasoline engine if you demand better acceleration. At the moment, if you want the purity of driving an EV, but you want that backup plan, then your two options really are the BMW i3 with the range extender and the Chevy Volt. The Clarity is a close third, however, but it is important to remember that if you floor the Clarity, it will turn on the gasoline engine. If you want the highest efficiency regardless of the mode involved, or the lowest operational cost, then actually the Ioniq plug-in hybrid or the Prius plug-in hybrid are likely going to be the best bets. Based on the average American's gasoline and electricity costs, those two vehicles are likely going to be less expensive to operate than something that has a longer EV range like the Chevy Volt. Now let's dive deeper into the Volt for comparison. The Volt's hybrid system is designed to stay in EV mode even when full throttle is applied, as long as you're in that particular drive mode. This seems to be mainly a function of the battery pack and how much oomph it can deliver at once, and we don't see that same level of dissipation from the battery pack in the Honda Clarity. That allows the EV to operate like an EV with the backup plant, so functionally it can operate like that i3 with the range extender. The reason that the i3 is a little bit further on one side than the other, however, is that when the Volt operates as a hybrid, it is actually faster 0 to 60 than when it's operating as an electric vehicle, and that's definitely not going on with the BMW i3. Compared to the Clarity, the gasoline fuel economy is identical according to the EPA. However, in our real-world driving, it was a few miles per gallon lower. EV range is quite similar, 53 miles in the Volt, 48 in the Clarity, and both of them are notably longer than any of the other plug-in hybrids in America right now. The big difference between the two vehicles is size. The Clarity is just about a foot longer than the Volt, so it's a significantly bigger car. It's a mid-size sedan. The Volt is styled more like a compact sedan. The Clarity is also 3 inches wider than the Volt. The extra width and the extra length combined allow the Clarity to have 50% more cargo space than the Volt, even though it is a sedan with a traditional trunk, not a liftback. The size difference is also why we find considerably more room inside the Clarity. It's very noticeable in the back seat especially, where we find nearly 1.5 inches more headroom and considerably more legroom back there. There's also a notable amount more width in the back seat, so if you plan on putting 3 adults or 3 larger children or 3 car seats in the back, it's definitely going to be easier in the Honda than in the Chevy. The trade-off, of course, is to get that extra room, you have to give up those 5 miles of EV range and be willing to let the Clarity turn on its gasoline engine when you've pressed on the accelerator pedal just a little bit too hard. When it comes to pricing, the base version of the Clarity versus the base version of the Bolt, the price tags are nearly identical, and they both qualify for the same federal tax credit. Now keep in mind that General Motors is likely going to run out of those tax credits before Honda is running out of those tax credits. So if you're watching this video perhaps about a year from now, so sometime in early 2019, those tax credits may not be available or may be significantly reduced on the Chevy Volt, but you're likely going to find the full credit on the Honda Clarity. When comparing those base prices, keep in mind that the Clarity comes with Honda Sensing, with their radar adaptive cruise control, the pre-collision braking, etc. Those features we definitely don't find on the base Volt. Keep in mind that I am talking about MSRP, because discounts come and go, so it's a little bit difficult to talk about them in videos like this. However, at the moment, we are seeing much greater discounts on the hood of the Chevy Volt, and that will likely make it less expensive for the average consumer versus the Honda Clarity. The Prius Prime versus Clarity comparison is a little bit trickier than the Volt because the design philosophy behind the two vehicles is a little bit different. We get notably less range in the Prius, we get notably less power out of the Prius as well. That's because it's generally more focused on high efficiency, whereas the Clarity is a little bit more focused on that longer EV range, nearly 50 miles, better handling, and better comfort inside the cabin. In order to get that extra efficiency, Toyota has definitely given up a little bit on the luxury features and on the handling in the Prius Prime, even though the current generation Prius is the best handling Prius ever. My bottom line impression when it comes to Prius Prime versus Honda Clarity is that the Clarity is a no-compromises mid-size sedan that has a plug on it, and the Prius Prime is a vehicle that you definitely have to make some compromises in order to get that higher efficiency. It's not quite as comfortable, it's not quite as large, the styling I don't think is quite as attractive as the Clarity either, and if you want to drive electric only for a considerable amount of time, it's definitely not going to be the right vehicle for you. However, efficiency is very high in the Prius Prime, average operating costs are definitely going to be low, and reliability has been very good. Up till now, the Kia Optima plug-in hybrid was my favorite mid-size sedan with a plug. For 2018, it starts at $35,210, but because it does not have as large of a battery pack as we find in the Clarity, it doesn't qualify for the same size tax discount. So it only qualifies for $4,900 off, dropping the effective price to $30,300. That's about $4,000 more than the Clarity. The Optima has about the same kind of power under the hood, relatively similar 0 to 60, and a fairly decent range as far as plug-in hybrids go, but its range is notably less than the Clarity, as is the amount of power we get out of it when it's in EV mode. It does offer more interior room than the Clarity, however. That's really noticeable when you look at rear headroom and rear legroom, and just the overall roomy feel of the cabin. Now on the downside, the trunk is notably smaller than the Clarity. It's also kind of funky shaped because that battery pack had to be positioned back there, and it does take up a good portion of that trunk. Because of the slightly different mission between the Optima plug-in and the Clarity plug-in, we find a slower charger in the Optima. So if you're looking to be able to go to work, charge quickly, and then drive another 29 miles, that would happen faster in the Clarity, about twice as fast as what we find in the Optima. I really liked the Optima plug-in the last time I drove one and considered it to be an excellent plug-in option in the midsize sedan. If you're looking for upgraded features like an upgraded audio system, more adjustable seats, more comfortable seats, or more room in the rear, the Optima is a great pick over the Clarity. However, I think in general the Clarity is the better buy. It's a little bit less expensive, it's still quite comfortable, quite accommodating, and has that larger, more practical trunk in the back. That combination of high efficiency, the generous trunk, the longer EV range, and of course the smaller price tag make the Clarity my pick in this segment. I would definitely buy the Clarity over the Volt or the Prius Prime hands down, even though the Prius Prime may cost less to operate long term. I think the Clarity is just a much more comfortable vehicle, and it's definitely worth the extra cash over the Prius Prime. If I were spending my own cash in this segment, it would be a pretty tough call between the Clarity and the Optima, because I do like the extra things that we see in that top-end Optima trim, the upgraded stereo, the more comfortable and more adjustable driver's seat, etc. It would be a very, very close tie. I have to say that if Honda would just give the Clarity adjustable lumbar support, then I would certainly buy it over the Optima as well. That's really the only thing that would be holding me back from that purchase. Be sure and let me know what you would do if you're shopping in this segment. Down there in the comment section below, hit that subscribe button. You can also click up there at the top corner of your screen if you want to head over to patreon.com and support this channel. Then head over to facebook.com/AlexNauto so you can see what we're driving this week, and I'll see you later.